Hey everybody, Questwise here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about The Witcher, a role-playing game by Talsorian Games and CD Projekt Red. If Talsorian Games sounds familiar to you, that's right, it's the same company who produced Cyberpunk 2020. It is written by Cody and Lisa Pondsmith. I believe it's the son and wife of Mike Pondsmith, who's a very celebrated game designer in the industry. And this game is amazing. Now, let me give you a little bit of background into my history with The Witcher. I'm not a big video game fan. I don't play a lot of video games. In fact, I own a Xbox 360. It's about the newest thing I have. So I didn't get to play The Witcher games for a very long time. I eventually picked up The Witcher 2 and played through a lot of that. Still have a long ways to go. And actually, prior to playing that, put off reading any of the books because of one small thing. I thought originally that the book series by Sapkowski was actually based upon the video games themselves. And I have found, it's a general rule of mine, and I don't read a lot of books based on video games because a lot of times they suck. Just straight up truth. A lot of times get books based upon video games just don't appeal to me. I'm not a fan. When I did find out that the books had actually been written way back in like the 80s, I jumped on them right away. And I kicked myself for putting it off for as long as I did, because the books are utterly amazing. If you haven't read any of the novels or short story collections of The Witcher, stop the video, go pick them up. You will not be sorry. The books are wonderfully told. They're very dark, fantasy. A lot of the stuff is sort of drawn, especially the short stories, have a lot of influence drawn from folktale and mythology and things like one of the stories is based on Beauty and the Beast, things like that. Wonderfully dark told stories. And then when you get into the main Witcher novel series, a very original story, brutal, dark, with lots of history and lots of awesome goodness. So I read all those, picked up The Witcher 2, played through a bunch of it, and fell in love with this line. So when I had heard about the Witcher role-playing game, I knew that I had to go pick this up. And I've actually had this for quite a while, and I thought I had done a video on this and realized a while back, about a week ago, that I had never done a review of The Witcher. And so we're going to remedy that today, and we're going to talk about this game because there's a lot in this book. And the book is not very big. It clocks in at about 330 pages. But man, there's a lot of great stuff in here, a lot of great storytelling potential. Now, this role-playing game does set itself apart from a lot of other role-playing games on the market because it is very strategic, I guess is the word I would use for it. There's a lot of, well, we'll just talk about it and I'll show you what I mean. So, the game itself, the core mechanic of the game is very simple. It's a D10. You roll a D10, you add your skill level to it, and you're trying to hit a target number. Or if you're opposing roll against somebody, you're rolling a D10 plus your skill bonus, and you're trying to beat the other player's roll. It's a very simple dice mechanic. You're only going to be using D10s and D6s throughout the entire game. So it's easy to sort of teach the basic mechanics of the game to anybody who's not played role-playing games before. Anybody who has played it should pick up on this pretty quickly. The book starts off with some pre-generated characters. If you want to jump right into the action and you have players who are big fans of the game, who are big fans of the novels, there are some pre-generated characters at the very beginning of the book, including Geralt the Witcher, Triss Merigold, Dandelion the Bard, one of my favorites from the video game, Vernon Roach. So they're all in there, and a bunch of others. And they're fully statted out, so you can just like copy those onto a character sheet, hand it to somebody, or photocopy the things right out of the book. They're just like one page long, and you're ready to play those iconic characters. There's also a great section on creating your own characters if you just want to play in the Witcher world. What's interesting about the characters in this book, and one of the things I really enjoy about role-playing games who use this system, it utilizes a life path system, which I first encountered in Burning Wheel and instantly fell in love. Now, Burning Wheel is a very intense, very crunchy, lots of moving parts to the game, but I really enjoyed the life path system because when you're done creating a character, while it takes a little bit longer, sometimes a lot longer, to create a character, when you're done creating those characters, you have a fully sort of immersed, fleshed out character ready to go. You know the personal history of the character, you know its motivations, their beliefs, their backgrounds. All that stuff is done at character creation. And it's nice to have a character that you feel like you've grown up with, that you know this character pretty well, but also leaves enough space that the characters will surprise you as you play them. There's room to grow those characters in the world as well. So using a life path system gives you lots of variety. There are tons of charts that you can either choose from or roll randomly on. Several pages of stuff like your parentage and your homeland and your background, events that happened to you as a child. There's a lot of great stuff in here that sort of builds that character. There's a lot of professions in this game, and some of them might surprise you because they're not. Some of them are iconic to sort of role-playing games, but this game, while combat is an important aspect of this game, it's also a game about characters living in a world as these things go on around them. So the professions, or what the character classes, include bard, craftsman, criminal, doctor, mage, man-at-arms, which is your soldier, or your warrior, fighter, whatever you want to call it, merchant, priest, and witcher. So there's a lot of character classes in here, a lot of professions, as I call them in the book, that are unique to this game, I think, as well. You're not in D&D. You're not going to find a merchant character class. You're not going to find a craftsman, right? That might just be a background trait for you. In this game, you're actually playing a craftsman. You're actually playing a merchant because Witchers are rare. If you know anything about the world of the Witcher, of the game and the books itself, Witchers were created. They're sort of created through alchemy, through magic, and trained. They're mutants, as he calls them in the book series. They've had experiments done to them to make them able to use magic, to be able to use these alchemical potions and stuff that would kill a normal man, to embolden them, to strengthen them, to fight monsters. They were created to fight these monsters that had invaded the world, that had grown up to be too powerful and was overrunning the world. And they did their job very, very well. There were different sects of witchers who sought out and fought these monsters and destroyed them, and did it so effectively that basically they had decimated the monster populations. The thing with witchers is that they most of them refuse to fight and get involved in politics of different nations and different cultures. So when they had defeated all the monsters, now you have these super powerful hunters, if you will, that refused to be part of worldly politics or warfare, and they were feared now that they were the monsters, and so a lot of them were hunted down. A lot of them just died in obscurity. So there are very few of them left in the world. You don't have to play a Witcher in the Witcher role-playing game. It's not required. If you do play a Witcher, one person will play a Witcher, and the others will be sort of his support crew, because he's going to be a very powerful character when you create them. They have a lot of abilities that normal characters don't. But you're not required to play a Witcher. You can play just a straight-up game where you have a craftsman, a priest, and a merchant. And you can play that out. There's a lot of possibilities, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, about how the game sort of structures itself around the fact that you can play a completely narrative game around a character being a merchant or a craftsman. There are tons, there's a section in this and tons of gear and weapons, uh, armor, potions, all sorts of stuff, items that you can collect. There's a great section in here on this. Um, One of the things that should be noted is that in this game, there are hit locations. So you have head, torso, and legs, I believe, and armor actually reduces the amount of damage you take. So it's damage reduction as opposed to just increasing your defense, which I like. I really enjoy that. I think your defense comes from your skill. When I'm playing a role playing game, what I enjoy is that your defensive number usually comes from your skill as a fighter. If you are trained as a man at arms, you're better at understanding warfare and how to avoid a blow. But if you do have to take a blow, the armor is actually going to reduce the amount of damage. It doesn't stop you from being hit, but it actually stops you from being killed or wounded. So that's part of the thing. That's part of the game itself. If you don't enjoy that, you probably will not enjoy this game because it is a pretty integral part of hit locations and damage reduction for armor. Another thing I love about this game, and if you've watched any of my videos before, you know I'm a huge fan of magic in games, and I'm a big fan of magic being dangerous and obscure and being very volatile. Magic is dangerous in this. It actually describes mages as drawing energy from a different dimension and focusing it through their bodies. So different things can happen. If you're using an earth type magic and something goes wrong, it actually locks your joints into place and the earth rumbles around you. If you're using an air type spell, it can knock you off of your feet. Magic can be very volatile and dangerous, and I love it. The way magic is sort of structured in this game is that it's a tiered system. So you have like journeyman spells and you have master spells. So it's not like there are levels. It's not like in D&D where you have like a level 2 spell. This will actually be a tiered type system. And as you increase in knowledge and power, you're able to unlock spells from different tiers as you go along. And of course, they're more powerful as you do. Another thing that really sets this game apart, there's two parts of this, and this is where the game gets really, really interesting. And I said before that you're able to play a game, based around like a merchant or a craftsman type class. This game draws heavily from the ideas of the video game in that there are two big sections on crafting and alchemy. Crafting is gathering items that you need to create something. Alchemy, same thing. You're gathering ingredients to create things. So you could base an entire game around a craftsman who is creating armor, creating weapons, creating items in general. And it gives you a beautiful section on how this is laid out. It gives you these diagrams of things that you need. It'll list out the items that you need, the ingredients you need to complete a certain item. It'll tell you how long it takes. It'll tell you the difficulty class of what it takes to create the item effectively. It also gives you the cost of creating an item and an investment cost. So if you're in a town and you're like, I really need to put together a breastplate quickly, but I don't really have any, I don't have the ingredients then. I don't have the items that I need to create this. You can pay the investment cost, which is basically you going through town and shopping for the items that you need. And it adds to the extra cost of putting this thing together, the time, the investment, and all that kind of stuff. And then you automatically have the stuff that you need, as long as they're sort of more common items. Some of the more rare items are much harder, and that gives you charts in here for that as well too. Like searching for items that might be really rare, you might have to go questing for. You might have to go find someone who you can buy it from at a super highly inflated price. But you can pay the investment cost on top of the normal cost that it would take you to create this thing. And if you do so, you have the pieces and parts. You roll in your difficulty number, and then if you succeed, you you create this item. I really appreciate this about this game, and I think that's what really sets this game apart from other role-playing games that are currently on the market that I've seen. You can actually spend an entire session simply questing for and looking for items to gain to create certain things. And that's really important to a game in which someone is playing a Witcher. Because another aspect of this game is the bestiary. There are some amazing creatures in here. Now, there's normal things like a thug, other certain, adversaries you might encounter, but then there are crazy monsters in here that you might encounter. Couple of different things. If you're playing a Witcher, Witchers have been trained, they've been schooled in knowledge of these creatures, of this folklore, of this mythology. And they have more knowledge about these types of things. So there's two different aspects in every monster entry. There's common knowledge, or the mythic knowledge that every person might know. There's a difficulty class to roll on that. And then there's a section on what the Witchers know. And if they pass their test of knowledge of that, they'll remember or know an aspect of the creature that no one else knows because they've been trained in it. They've been their whole lives have been spent learning about battling these creatures. A lot of these monsters will have certain weaknesses that you have to discover by interacting with the game. Say you come upon a town that's being ravaged by a werewolf, but you've never encountered a werewolf before, and you fail your Witcher roll. So you really don't remember anything about werewolves or what their weaknesses are, or their habitat, what their lifestyles are like. So you have to go and gather information. So your characters are going to go, they're going to interview NPCs, they're going to visit libraries and do some study and some research. And they might come up with the idea of that, hey, werewolves are very susceptible to, their weakness is silver. So what are we going to do? Well, let's create some silver-tipped arrows. Okay, well, the craftsman's now going to go and try to gather some resources and some items and put these things together. We might need a silver sword. Well, sometimes Witchers carry those because a lot of monsters are susceptible to silver. If you've read the books, you know this. The Witcher always carries two swords, right? One for men, one for monsters. And so there's that aspect of gathering knowledge. And you could spend whole sessions of where you're simply investigating a monster before you actually encounter the thing. Try to go out and take it down. I love this. I think this is a great aspect of this game. It adds such a depth to the game. It adds such a much more sort of realism as opposed to being just like, hey, we know there's a dragon up there, let's go fight it and kill it. It adds that aspect of like, everything is unique, everything is different, everything is dangerous. And in order to effectively combat it, you have to go and do research. And a lot of the monsters will have variable weaknesses. So every werewolf, and this is just an example, it's not the werewolf, but the only one that comes to my mind is that every werewolf might have a different weakness. It might have a different ecology behind it. And so you have to investigate the monster itself as a individual creature before going and trying to tackle it. Combat is broken up into two different degrees of difficulty. Not difficulty, two different degrees of immersion. Let's put it that way. There's basic combat and in-depth combat. This game, while you can play it theater of the mind, you don't really need to use miniatures or combat grid. When it comes to actual combat, I think that miniatures would be very useful because the game does utilize things like facing. It's important to know what you're looking at and what you can see. So vision is another thing that's very important in this game. To add a little bit more realism to it, you might be wearing a helmet, right, to protect your head from any kind of blows. The problem is that some helmets, the visors on them are thin. It limits your field of vision and increases what you cannot see, your field of vision. So facing and vision is very important in this game, and again, like I said, it adds a little bit more of that feel of realism to it. So miniatures might be um, a nice investment for this, but at the same time, you can play this completely theater of the mind. It's just kind of you have to kind of be kind of fair of what you can see and what you can't see, because a lot of monsters, a lot of combat is involved in being smart. Combat in this game is very deadly. It can be very deadly. You could be dead in one or two sword strokes. And that's, it kind of, again, mimics that sort of realism. So when you're fighting something, you want to be smart. You want to be tactful. You make strategies of how you're going to encounter something, even if it's just a city guard. Like there's a tower guard on the wall, and you need to sneak up and assassinate him or subdue him in some way. Um, you have to think about these things in a tactical manner, and so things like facing and vision become very important. There are fumble and critical tables in this as well too. Again, another level of richness to the game. Another thing I really found interesting about this is that you have an option in combat. You have fast and strong strikes that you can choose between. Fast strikes are quick. You can attack twice in one. Normally, you get a movement and an action. Fast strikes count as one action. You can move, swing your sword twice, or whatever. Stab twice with a dagger or something. It doesn't have to be against the same target, which is nice. So, you're fighting a group of guards. You can go in and swing at one and swing at another. The problem is that the fast strikes are not. They're just strikes. They don't do any extra damage. A strong strike is where you're focusing your attack on somebody. It might be a two-handed swing. You come down. It does more damage, but allows you to only strike once. You can also kind of push yourself to do. You can take sort of fatigue in order to attack more times, which is, again, adds another level of depth and realism to the game. Another thing I really enjoy about this game, and this really, again, enforces the whole craftsman, merchant, non-combat focused characters, is that there's a section on verbal combat. I first, again, saw this in Burning Wheel with the Duel of Wits. In this, it's the same kind of thing, but way simpler. Burning Wheel, like I said, very complicated, very complex game, and can be kind of overwhelming at times. I don't know if this was an influence to The Witcher at all. I don't know if the Pondsmiths actually took any of those into consideration, but I feel like there's a lot of similarities in here. But they've taken verbal combat and made it an accessible and useful thing. So you could have a merchant having a verbal combat with somebody, haggling over the price of some items. It's very effective. It's not hard. It's a little bit crunchy. Now the game does have a lot of moving parts to it, but I enjoy that, and I feel like it's done in such a smooth way, and has been very well constructed, that it doesn't feel super cumbersome. Reading through it once or twice, you get the idea, and it seems to flow very well. But there are a lot of moving parts in this game. Like I said, the dice mechanic itself is super simple, but there's a lot of cool moving parts to this. So verbal combat actually really adds that another level to that immersion factor, in that you can play a character that does not have to be combat focused and can still be a viable character and can engage in combat with somebody. Whether it be making a trade deal or haggling over the price of something. You could be a priest character who's trying to, convert somebody to their faith, or at least, open their mind to a new point of view. That's all verbal combat, and I really appreciate that from this game. Like I said, it really, really reinforces the strength of characters that are not combat focused. At the back of this book, there is I already talked about the bestiary. It's amazing. The full color art, 2-page spread on the monsters, variable charts, and all kinds of stuff. But there's a large portion of the end of this book that is focused on The Witcher itself. Like I said, if you have any characters or any players who are playing a Witcher character, it's a very involved character. It's going to be a very powerful character. It's going to kind of overshadow some of what the other characters can do. So there's a big section in here about things like Witcher signs, Witcher magic, crafting items, specific Witcher items, potions, salves, oils for your weapons, a lot of stuff, and it's done very, very well. But there's a whole section on just playing a Witcher in here as well. That, again, if you're playing a Witcher character, it like I said, it's going to be a very powerful character, and it's a way to sort of make it fit into the world, and the other characters can kind of live up to being a companion of a Witcher. If you haven't checked out this game, I highly recommend it. I believe this is available. I mean, I'll post some links down below in the description as to where you can get this. But it's definitely worth checking out. If you're a fan of the video games, if you're a fan of the novels, they've blended both into this very, very well. A lot of the characters are from the video game, but a lot of the history in here, there's a huge section in here on the history of the world and the different nations, the Nilfgaardians, and the sort of conflicts in the past about the Witchers and what has happened to them, what's the current state of the world and stuff as well. Definitely worth checking out. Our Talsorian Games, Cody and Lisa Pondsmith. I'm Questwise, and until next time, game on, my friends. Stay safe.